Today on Tested 4x4, we're going to take a look at one of my favorite ex-military vehicles, the Kaiser M715 1.25 ton pickup truck. Now this was the last official Jeep to be put into service by the US military, and it has similar styling cues to the full-size Jeep J20 pickup truck and Cherokee Chiefs. What makes these trucks so great is how rare they are. The Kaiser Corporation built only 33,000 of the M715, and it was built to replace the potent Dodge M37. It was the first military vehicle to be built using the new commercial off-the-shelf vehicle procurement program. Now that program was a first for the US military. Instead of having a vehicle custom built to their specifications like the little Willys-Jeep, the M715 was built using commercially available parts. Now that could be the reason that the truck only lasted 2 years in service and was eventually deemed too fragile and unreliable for future military service. Now this 715 is at my shop to get a full Restomod treatment, but that gives us the rare opportunity to look at this truck with the body completely removed. This is the entire running gear and chassis from underneath that M715. Now the 715 saw service in Vietnam, the Korean Demilitarized Zone, and a bunch of European bases. But the overall failure point of this vehicle was this bad boy right here, the overhead cam straight six engine. This engine was a first for the US military, so maintaining it became a challenge. Ironically, Kaiser had already pulled this motor out of the civilian J20 trucks by 1968, but they left it in for all the military M715s. It had a problem with oil consumption and reliability and required constant maintenance, which is what drove this truck out of service. By 1970, most M715s were actually being stripped for parts to keep the rest of the fleet running at different bases around the world. The M715 drivetrain is pretty standard running gear for a heavy-duty pickup of the era. A T98 4-speed synchronized transmission, an NP200 cast iron all-gear transfer case with a 1.9:1 low-range ratio, Dana 60 front axle with closed knuckles, and a full float Dana 70 rear with a 587 ring and pinion. Now because of those deep axle ratios, the overall speed was really limited to an M715, and these vehicles did have a tendency to evacuate all the fluid from inside the transfer cases if you exceeded the speed rating that is written on the dash of most of these vehicles. But inside the interior, it's like typical military vehicle, all bare bones, just what you need. A set of gauges, a set of incredibly complicated switches that unless you're trained on how this system works, it becomes very difficult to understand how to start the truck. And like everything else in a military vehicle, 24-volt power system to make the whole thing run. The 715 that we started looking at today was a perfect example of a well-preserved piece of ex-military hardware. But we can't drive that truck because it's not finished being built. And I wanted to get you guys some seat time in a 715. Luckily, I happen to own one of these trucks because, like I said before, I absolutely love them. Now this vehicle is kind of like what happens to these 715s after their military service. So when the 715 was replaced by the Dodge 880 1.25 ton pickup truck, the military offered up all the M715s to other government agencies to use. They just didn't put them up for sale. You were not allowed to buy them. This truck ended up in Birmingham, Alabama as an emergency management truck for their forestry service, and it sat there for decades, being used occasionally. Then it was eventually sold as part of a government surplus auction, and over the years it eventually ended up in a junkyard in Tennessee where they were actually going to let it sit and scrap, or even worse, crush it. And that is where I found it. I basically saved this truck from the junkyard. I kept everything that I love about 715s. I kept the body, kept the frame, kept the suspension, but then swapped in modern everything else. So it has a 5.7 liter Hemi underneath the hood, 5-speed automatic transmission, 2 transfer cases, and a 60 in the front and a 14 bolt out back. It's kind of like a Restomod really cool ex-military rock crawler. So that is what we're gonna do with it today. The cool thing about the 715 is honestly the style. I mean, this is a truck that the military is certainly never going to build another one of these. Nothing else on the road looks like it. So owning it and taking it to places, people love the look of it. They think it's super cool. It's just a truck that's just such a pleasure to own because it's so rare. The 715 trucks were designated troop carriers, but were also built in multiple variants. There was the M724, which was a bare cabin chassis, usually combined with some type of maintenance body, the M725, which was an ambulance, and the M726 telephone maintenance truck. Specs on the M715s are overall length 209 3/4 inches, width 85 inches. It weighs 5,500 pounds without the PTO winch on the front, powered by a 6-cylinder Tornado engine that put out 132 horsepower. Had a turning radius of 28 feet, 4-wheel drum brakes, and originally shipped with 9x16 8-ply tires. The overall height of the truck was 75 inches, but you could reduce it to 59 inches because of the fold-down windshield, which made the vehicle smaller for transport. The M715 was the last military vehicle to be equipped with this fold-down windshield feature. Now, people say all the time when you own a piece of American history like an old military truck, you don't own it. You're just the steward of it. And it sounds super corny, but it's absolutely true. I mean, I don't know what kind of life this truck had in the military or when it was serving its time in Birmingham, Alabama, responding to different emergencies, but all of that is the history that's wrapped up in this truck. I'm just asking it to climb over rocks for fun. So I know that it is super happy with the life that it has with me, but the history that's inside this vehicle is probably absolutely amazing. There's only one drawback to off-roading an M715, and that is the size of the truck. It's a big truck to have out in the woods, and it's a big hood. It's hard to see everything. You tend to sort of feel your way through the trail, which is fine because it's strong steel. Strong steel. That's my theory, at least. Hemmings Marketplace is a great place to search for classic ex-military vehicles for sale. Whether you want to restore it to its original service style or swap in a modern drivetrain to mix the old style with modern convenience, you definitely end up with a one-of-a-kind vehicle.